to it as we go. I'm going to be creating a pumpkin for you guys today. This weekend we're hosting our Harvest Festival where we have made over 300 pumpkins. We're actually close to about 500 right now. Those pumpkins will be out on display. You can pick some out if you're interested in them. They're all different shapes, sizes, colors. So a pretty cool event. We also have our raffle going on as well. So I'm going to make one of those pumpkins. We're going to start with our clear glass. It is soda lime glass, so it's a very specific formula that we use. We can do different things to that glass. Either different colors, we can add minerals, or we can change the properties of the glass as well. So the glass we have is workable between anywhere 1200 to 2000 degrees. We can add lead to glass to make it softer, and when it's cold, it's easier to cut. If we add something like borax to it, we have to heat it up closer to about 4,000 degrees, so we don't really work with that here in this studio. But we have a flame working studio where we do use it. Borosilicate glass is also known as Pyrex. So it's something in our households that we can take from room temperature and put in our ovens at 400 degrees and nothing will happen. This glass is a little bit different. If we do that, the thermal shock from that temperature change will actually break the glass. But it's kind of our Goldilocks mixture to kind of work with in our hot shop. So we're working on a flow pipe. It's a hollow stainless steel pipe. And the thing about iron and steel is glass will not stick to it unless it's already preheated. So we have a couple of chambers here. One is to heat up our pipes. The other one I'm going to be working out of a lot today. It's a reheating chamber. The glass is going to cool down in the ambient air really fast, but also when I touch it with cold steel tools, they're going to act like a heat sink. So I'm going to be constantly heating out of this furnace. It's also 2000 degrees. We do not keep this on all the time. It takes about an hour to heat up, so we turn it on and off every day. But the main furnace that holds all of our melt glass is on 24/7. So I'm going to grab some of the glass. When it is 2000 degrees, it is a liquid. It's kind of like honey. So I have to wind it up like a honey spoon. And while I'm working today, I'm always going to be turning this pipe. If I stop turning, gravity is going to take over, and the glass is going to start to run away from the pipe. But what I can do to control it is also use our steel table here. It's a 1/2 inch thick piece of steel. We call it a marber. And we use this to help us shape and control the glass. Just like the pipe, it is acting like a heat sink, but the core of the glass should be still pretty hot right now. So what I'm going to do is blow some air in the pipe. Trapping it with my thumb. The air is going to go to the hot glass and start to expand, creating a bubble. So that's going to be the inside of the pumpkin later on. Now that is a very small amount of glass. If I want more, I have to let this cool down and be stable and keep going back into that furnace and winding it up like a honey spoon again. So each time we go into the furnace, we call it a gather. And the glass is going to weigh about the same amount of a rock, the same size. But it's going to feel a little bit heavier to me because I'm working on a fulcrum right now. So the glass is clear. It just looks orange when it's really hot. Just because of the minerals that it's made up of, kind of like the iron pipe right now. As it cools off, it's going to start to become more clear. And the same thing's going to happen with the color when we pick it up. So each color is made up of a different mineral added to the clear glass mixture. We actually get it pre-mixed from a company in Germany. They take their clear mixture and add the different minerals. So for instance, today I'm going to be using a little bit of yellow. That has some sulfur. I have a different color here called a gold brown. It actually has a little bit of gold in it. And what's going to happen is later I'm going to hit it with a torch. Some of the gold's going to come to the surface and it might look a little bit shiny. So we call those colors reducing colors. So this should be pretty cooled off by now. I'm going to keep adding more layers so I have enough glass I want to work with. can only grab so much glass at a time. If I grab too much, I can always just let some of it run off. And the cool thing about our clear glass, and pretty much all glass, it's one of the most recyclable materials that we use today. So what can happen is once that's cooled down, I can throw it right back into the furnace, and we can melt it down, just keep using it again. If it has a little bit of color, we don't want to throw it right into that furnace, but we can melt it down and use it for different projects. So at this point, glass is also sticky like honey when it's hot. It's going to allow me to grab some more glass. In this case, I'm adding some yellow transparent color. And it's in the form of what we call frit. So normally we get glass color in solid tubes or rods called color rod. And it's a very dense amount of color. We intend to stretch the glass by blowing into it, and it gets thinner and less dense. If we crush it up, we get what's called frit. So that's what I added right now, is frit. If we grind it up even finer, we get a nice powder. And the reason why we would add it in different forms is to get different patterns in the glass. So this is going to turn bright orange when it's hot. After it cools down, it'll turn that yellow color, but we might not see that today. By the time I finish with the pumpkin, it's still going to be over 900 degrees. I'm going to have to let it cool down slowly in a kiln. We actually have them located on both sides of the studio. The one I'm going to use is sitting at 900 degrees right now, actually 918 degrees. And it's going to stay that hot all day until we're finished working in the studio. At that point, we have to let it slowly cool down over about 24 hours. And what that does is relieve any stress that can be built up in the glass. So glass is a really good insulator. And what happens is the outside cools down quicker than the core. We're going from a liquid state to a solid state. So all the molecules moving around are going to start to slow down and squeeze on themselves. They can create about 10,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. And what that can do is actually crack and sometimes make the glass explode. So we don't want that to happen to the pieces we make. So we let them cool down slowly and more evenly, and it relieves all that stress. So it's a process called annealing. It's very similar to what we do with steel to temper or anneal steel as well. So I'm going to keep adding color until I have enough on there. Now that color is pretty cold, so I'll have to heat it back up to working temperature. And I'm going to make sure they still have an air bubble. It hasn't collapsed from adding all that color. So once I get this hot enough, I can use some hand tools to help shape the glass. I have to make sure all the colors fuse first. And one way you can tell the temperature is not just by the color. Sometimes color can be deceiving, like a white color can always look white. Some colors are really nice to work with, like blues, because of the opposite of that orange. We can really tell the heat. But what I'm actually doing is feeling how much the glass is trying to move away from the pipe. Now the tool I'm using is called a block, made of cherry wood. And I'm not actually using the wood to shape, I'm actually using a really thin layer of steam. But once that water evaporates, I do start to touch the wood and it burns. So that's the whole reason we keep it soaked until we're ready to use that tool. So I have it shaped up and more in control. I'm going to give it a little more heat and make sure that air bubble's still inside. So now when we blow glass, we don't actually have to blow too hard if it's really hot. Once it starts cooling down, it becomes more solid. That's when we add more pressure. But once the glass reaches around that 1200 degrees, it becomes more solid at around 1000. It doesn't matter how hard we can blow into it, nothing's going to happen. But if I don't want to keep constantly blowing into the glass, I can always trap it, let the heat work for me. Let the air travel to the glass again and expand. Can always add a little bit more as we go. Now I have the bubble still inside. I can see it start to expand. But I still want to make a bigger pumpkin, so I'm going to add even more glass. Now sometimes we add color in between layers. What that does is kind of protect the color. If we have a really thin layer on the outside, we can actually scratch it really lightly and remove some of it. So if we add another layer of clear too, it kind of protects the color. Now each time I go into the furnace, the pipe does start to heat up. So we have a tool here, it's just a pipe chiller. It uses some water just to help cool down the pipe and make it a little bit safer to work with. I want to try to grab as close as I can to the glass without getting burned. But some of that radiant heat's always going to come back into the pipe. So I can never grab super close, about right where that tarnished area ends. Once this is stable, I'm going to add one more layer, maybe two. I'm going to let that fresh glass, all that heat soak back into the core, make sure it's all even again. Now these wood blocks do come in different sizes depending on how much glass we have. But they're always a nice round kind of light bulb shape. And that's a nice round shape to blow some air. So if we have a different shape when we blow air into the glass, it'll kind of follow the shape. But it also likes to expand towards the hottest region, which tends to be the end of the glass. Because once again, that pipe's taking a lot of heat away. So I'm going to make sure all that heat's even. I'm going to shake this up a little bit more. And eventually we're going to need to add some of the texture that the pumpkin has. So we have a special tool called an optic mold. It's the one right in front of those stairs. And basically that mold has even lines cut through it, kind of at a taper. And that's going to create the ridges on the outside of the pumpkin. But in order for this glass to fit inside that mold, I kind of have to make that tapered shape. So I'm using the marker again to kind of go at an angle and reshape the glass. Now I'm going to get one more layer so we have a nice big pumpkin. We always add all the glass that we want to work with first before we blow it out into the final shape. So I have to heat this up so it's working temperature. And before I grab more glass, once again I have to go through that cool down process. it one quick coating of clear, and then we're going to go right into that mold. Now, just like the wooden block molds, the optic molds come in different shapes, sizes as well. But the one we're using is tapered, so it'll actually come out of the mold. If we use a different shape, it can actually get stuck. So what we do is cut those in half, kind of pinch them open. But the nice optic ones, we don't have to do that. We keep it nice and round. So typically when we make large glass objects, the bigger it gets, it feels a little bit heavier. We have teams anywhere between 2 to 10 people. It also kind of depends on how advanced of a technique we're using as well. Now the nice thing about pumpkins is typically we work kind of upside down when we make balloon vessels. We have to transfer them onto a second pipe so we can work on the second half or the top half. But with pumpkins, when we get this off of the pipe, we're actually going to add the stems where the pipe was, so we don't have to transfer it, which would take 2 people. I'm still making sure everything stays even on the pipe as much as I can. The whole time I've been working, I've been trying to keep it fairly level too. By holding it down, it does start to stretch and get longer. And if I hold it straight up in the air, it'll actually kind of shrink and flatten. And that's the difference of how we can make something like a base or a bowl. So we're going to use our optic mold now. So I'm blowing some air, trapping it, letting it fill out all of those ridges. Let it cool down a little bit too with those ridges. You can see the texture of that. Now this isn't quite a pumpkin shape yet. I will have to blow some air inside, pop those ridges out, and make it look more like a pumpkin. But I want to add a little bit of design to it as well. So what I'm going to do is put some color only on the ridges now, before I start inflating it further. So I do have to add a little bit of heat back into the outside because that mold did cool it down. The core is still pretty hot, but the outside shell a little bit cooler, and the glass color won't stick to it unless we get a little bit hotter. So I have some of that color, that cold brown. We're going to add it in the powder form on the ridges so it's not filling out the center part, just the outer texture. And there's a little extra glass at the end. Because it's so pointy and tapered, if we start blowing into it, that little end is will never really fill out, so we don't want to knob down there. I'm going to remove some of the extra glass that I have. I'm going to be using a tool called jacks. Kind of look like tongs, but they have 2 blades on them that we can use to make constriction. they actually have 4 blades on them. And when they close, they make a nice diamond. The nice thing about that is it brings all the glass back to the center. Instead of making a harsh line across the glass, it'll be brought right to the bottom center of that pumpkin. Now as that glass cools down on the floor that I cut off, it might look a little harmless, but it might actually pop and crack and sometimes explode later on. So we never grab the glass on the floor. It might be sharp, it might be hot. But if it does cool down, once again, we can always recycle that by melting it down and using it for a different project. So at this point, I'm going to make sure I have the right shape, and I'm going to start blowing some air back into the pumpkin. And before it gets too big, I'm going to start a second constriction. This is where I'm going to remove the pumpkin from the pipe later on. So this tool that I have, the jacks are the actual name of them. And the line we're making is called a jack line. It can be a little tricky at first because of all those ridges. Don't want to cut in very smooth. Once we get it started, we'll just keep tightening that up. Once again, it's going to take a few steps because the glass is going to cool down really quickly from those steel tools. Now as the pumpkin gets larger, I'm going to start opening some of our furnace doors. I want to try to keep them as closed as much as I can because once again that's 2,000 degrees coming towards me. And the larger the doors, I'm going to feel more of that heat. Now I do have a steel shield here to help protect me, but I still have to feel some of that with my hands and every once in a while I'm looking to see what the glass is doing. Now there's a lot of heat coming off of the piece while we're working as well, but over time glass blowers kind of develop a little bit of a resistance to that heat, but we still feel a lot of it on our hands when we're cooling the glass. So I'm going to keep cutting that line in before I can make it any larger. Keep inflating and get the final shape. Before I'm finished, we're going to try to bring some of that gold color back to the surface. I have a foot pedal down here. What it does is adds more fuel into the furnace and less air. And it's that fuel that's going to bring the minerals, in that case the gold, to the surface of the glass. The constriction and blow air kind of widens itself, but I need that to be a lot smaller. That way when I add the stem, it covers it up and doesn't fall through the pumpkin. need to make sure the pumpkin's going to stand upright. So we'll kind of flatten the bottom section out once it's a little bit bigger. That way it doesn't fall over when it's in our pumpkin patch. Once again, this pumpkin will be available at the harvest. We've been making them all year long. Notice I start spinning a little bit quicker when it gets hotter. If I spin too fast, centrifugal force is going to start widening the pumpkin. If I spin too slow, it does start to kind of fall towards the end. But I try to want to keep it on center without spinning too quickly. If I do want to make it wider, I could always speed up. At this point, I have it pretty well shaped. I'm going to let it cool off a little bit, and then we're going to use some of our torches and the furnace there to kind of bring some of that color. So this is the same idea. It's a hand torch. It's actually propane. We'll use this along with the furnace there to help bring some of that color to the surface. Only that gold brown has that metallic in it. The yellow that we added earlier is kind of protected so it won't come to the surface, only that powder. As close as I can, somewhere between 900 and 1,000 degrees, maybe just a slight bit hotter. I don't want to put this pumpkin away too hot because it can actually slump down and shrink, but I also don't want to put it too cold and have it crack like the piece we cut off on the floor earlier. I'm going to knock it off the pipe here. And very quickly, I have to make this stem before that cools down too much. So I'm going to grab some more glass. Now this is a solid pipe. I don't need to blow air into the stem, so I can use this. And I have a very limited amount of time before that pumpkin cools down. So I have to work pretty quickly through the stem process. saved enough heat in this. The core should still be pretty hot, so I shouldn't have to heat it too much. What we're going to do is attach it, and it should be kind of like taffy, and we're going to be able to stretch it real long, make some nice curls on the stem. So we'll cover up the hole from earlier where that pipe was. Stretch that in glass, give it some twist. And wrap it around. We'll have to cut some of that glass away. Now we also have a hand torch here as well. It does get a little sharp from our cut mark, so we always make sure it's nice and smooth by melting that in. And we can see if we can get some of that metallic to come out of the stem as well. So once again, this is over 900 degrees sitting there. I don't want to grab it with my bare hands, but I do have to load it into our kiln. At that point, it will pull off. The silver color of that metallic will stay, but that yellow color will be a lot brighter yellow once it cools all the way down. So that should take about 24 hours to cool off. Now it does depend on how thick the glass is. We try to keep things a lot thinner in our studio, so it only takes that 24-hour process. When we do cast glass, it's very thick, solid. Some of the pieces we have throughout the museum, we don't have one right now, but it used to be on display. We'll bring it back after the transformation. There's a large solid cast piece, it's one of the biggest ones we have. It took about 6 months to cool down because of how thick it was. There's a pretty famous story. The NASA Hubble telescope has a large